Okay. Today, my guest is Professor Anil Gupta. I will keep my introduction short to maximize our time with him. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll talk about Anil as a person. Professor Gupta is a thought leader and esteemed scholar, and finally, as a mentor to many PhD students and junior faculty. For the sake of time, I will skip many of his accomplishments and give you a very quick snapshot. Anil is a fellow of the AIB and SMS. He is listed among the most highly cited scholars in the field of economics and business. He is ranked by MIR as one of the top 20 North American superstars for research in strategy and organization. He is included in the AMJ's Hall of Fame and was mentioned as a rising superstar by the Economist magazine on innovation in emerging markets. One of his papers was recognized in the list of the top 10 most cited articles published in AMJ and as one of the 50 most noted strategy works. He has held several editorial positions at regular and special issues at Organization Science, AMJ, Information Systems Research. He has served as a track program or division chair in various conferences such as SMS, AIB, and Academy of Management. He received many Best Professor awards, and he's also in the Thinkers 50 list. Thank you, Anil, for joining us.
Thank you, Ilgaz. My pleasure.
Anil, what did you want to become when you were a child?
Well, I mean, when I wanted to, I grew up in India, and obviously in India, if you, if people think you are maybe a little bit smart, the goal is to become a doctor or an engineer. So I didn't know which of those two paths I will pick, but in high school, I picked that I would be an engineer.
And can you pinpoint the earliest moment of awareness between domestic versus international?
Yeah, that for somebody from India is very easy because even, in fact, I was born in 1949. India got independence from Britain in 1947. So very early on, even as a kid, I was very aware of the fact that India had just become independent from Britain, and Britain obviously is a foreign country. So I would say kind of, maybe 3 years old.
How did you choose to be an IB scholar?
So actually, becoming an IB scholar happened around 1990. So I finished my doctorate in 1980, and the first 10 years, all my work was actually on, had nothing to do with multinational firms or globalization. It was all about managing the diversified firm. And in fact, so I wrote, several papers for AMJ, AMR, and other journals, and they were all around how the corporate center manages different business units and how differences, heterogeneity among business units affects the nature of corporate governance over the business units. And so around 1990, I said, hey, this particular lens is actually totally applicable to how in a multinational firm, the corporate center would govern heterogeneous subsidiaries around the world, but also similarly how a venture capital firm would govern a set of heterogeneous portfolio companies. And so as I was sort of, let's say, getting a little bit tired of working on managing the diversified firm, I branched out in both of these directions at the same time. So I, in terms of working on the multinational firm, the global enterprise, there I continued work with my co-author from the previous 10 years on the diversified firm, Vijay Govindrajan at Tuck School. And on the venture capital side, so Harry Sapienza, who is a chaired prof at Minnesota at Carlson School, he was working on a PhD thesis at that time or just starting out. So he and I got into discussion. I said, hey, what about studying how venture capital firms govern the heterogeneity of portfolio companies. And in fact, he ran with it, and it was a fantastic thesis. It got the Best Dissertation Award from the Entrepreneurship Division at AOM, and also from from TIMSS. And then I've continued work on venture capital firms since then, and I've also continued work on the multinational enterprise.
Perfect. Something that is not on your CV, something not many people know about you.
Yeah. So actually, like in 1990, when I started branching out, away from, let's say, managing the diversified firm and looking at the multinational enterprise as well as the venture capital firm, then in terms of the academic journal papers, the books and so on, so I, let's say 90% of my effort went into the multinational enterprise. And so perhaps that's what I'm more known for, and that's what my my CV might indicate. But in terms of also, I have published over the last 20 years, I would say maybe 3 or 4 papers in AMJ and other outlets on actually venture capital firms. So what people probably would not know is that over the last 30 years, I have worked quite actively as an investor, as an advisor to technology startups. It started from my interest in venture capital in the 1990s. It really picked up steam in 2000, when I spent a year at Stanford School of Engineering in Kathy Eisenhardt's outfit, if you will, there in management science and engineering. And there I really built, a fairly good network of VCs, and I spent a whole year interacting with tech startups and then I, over time I became an advisor, an investor, and so on, and that continues.
What are you most proud of?
I think, in terms of, if I say most proud of, I would say, obviously, I'm fairly happy with my academic side. But what I'm most proud of is on the family side. I have 3 kids. And what I'm most proud of is that I think I have been a good, and my wife too, that we've been good parents, and we have raised accomplished and kids, but also with extremely good value systems. So my son, he graduated from Stanford computer science, and he is a software engineer in Silicon Valley, and we have identical twin daughters. They are currently freshmen at Yale, also in computer science, very heavy into machine learning, and so on. And they all, I think, are doing fine or will do fine, but also they have, I think, the right value systems.
Perfect. What are you most passionate about?
I think what I'm most passionate about is really, my first degree was in engineering. And then after that, I went to MBA, then I worked for Unilever as a product manager. And then I, went did my doctorate and became an academic. And I think going back to my first degree, which is engineering. So in my heart, I'm basically still, let's say, a technocrat. Or not technocrat may not be the right word, but what I'm most passionate about is really the power of technology to solve society's biggest problems. Naturally, technology is a double-edged sword. It can also be misused and abused, but at the same time, without technology, whether it's you go back to the invention of the wheel or fire. Without technology, we would be nowhere, still living in trees.
Let's talk about regrets. What is one thing you wish you would have done that you didn't?
Well, I think, that I had done, which I didn't, is, I have, of course, strategy is my kind of innate as a subject phenomenon, my love. And as I was saying, that I have, I love the power of technology to solve society's big problems. And so, kind of, let's say the interface between strategy and technology is something that is very dear to me, and that comes into play, in my role as an investor and advisor to tech ventures. So if I, let's say, had my druthers, maybe after my doctorate, instead of becoming an academic, I might have gone into venture capital. And I, still think about it, is that, certainly that would have been an extremely satisfying career.
It would actually. So let's switch gears and talk about research. How do you explain your research to people who don't read your work regularly?
Yeah. So, I mean, like, for example, you talked about in the questions you sent to me was, suppose, let's say I found myself stranded in a village somewhere. And so how would I explain, to the people what I do? And I think, one way to answer that question would be that I would say, basically, I look at the world, all the societies around the world as really interconnected. Almost like uh, components, if you will, of an interconnected global society. And what that means is that there is a vast exist and has existed and will continue to exist, a vast opportunity for us to learn from each other, from one society to learn from another society, and to leverage the power of scale to solve the big problems, whether they have to do with pandemics or with climate change or with food scarcity or anything. And so what I do really is to study the interconnections among societies and how those interconnections can be used to learn from each other and to leverage the power of scale.
Anil, what are the omitted, not variables, but omitted factors in IB research? Well, for instance, do you see the increased nationalism, populism as a threat to the ideal that you were describing?
The well, yes and no. Fundamentally, I would say no. Uh, and so the first part of your question, Ilgas, about the omitted variables. So I would say, of course, the not so much omitted variables, but let's say underemphasized variables, one might say, is an article by Tarun Khanna not too long back. It's certainly it's a few years old, but less than 10 years old, on contextual intelligence. And in there, I like very much what he says. He says he's been studying, globalization for many, many years, just like all of us. And yet he finds at how context matters. So I think that contextual heterogeneity is perhaps underemphasized. And more emphasis, if you will, on the power of scale, on the power of integration. But of course, all of those are important, but so is contextual heterogeneity. So I think that's one. But the end part of contextual heterogeneity and going deep into the context is all the things you talked about: populism, nationalism, in terms of that globalization, what it is doing, and what does it do to, let's say, growing inequality in societies. Obviously, the bigger factor in growing inequality has to do with technology, and technology obviously plays a bigger role. Automation, for example, in societal divide. But so does globalization, especially for the rich, advanced economies, because it's people in Michigan and Pennsylvania who voted for Trump, even though the US as a whole benefited from global integration. But, those states that voted for Trump, union labor, blue collar labor, they got hurt. And there is plenty of good research which tells us that that's what happened in labor economics. So, but looking ahead, do I see populism, nationalism as a threat to globalization? I don't. And the reason I don't is because the ultimately globalization is defined as interconnectedness among countries, among nations. And the interconnectedness is absolutely multidimensional. Obviously, connectedness by trade in physical goods is one of them, trade in services, movement of technology, movement of other types of know-how, obviously included in that, the movement of ideas, movement of data. And so, and what has happened is that, in a way, a lot of the narrative in the popular press, and even by some economists, it's become captive to old orthodox thinking. And by that, what I mean is become captive to the idea that if trade in physical goods is somehow declining in absolute terms, or declining when adjusted for the size of global GDP, then in fact globalization, has seen its glory days are gone, and now we are in a world of deglobalization. And I think that's absolute and total nonsense. Because we are in an era of where connectedness is robust. It's just that it's not connectedness by atoms, but connectedness by bits. And obviously, of course, that's not the only thing, but you can say, financial connectedness. Naturally, you can say connectedness by bits. But maybe we can look at that as a separate dimension. You wake up in 2030, and I look at Tesla as a good example of the future of globalization, that Tesla is already a global enterprise, and it will be a bigger global enterprise, and they will have factories around the world, and it will be in China for China, and they might open other 2 or 3 factories in Asia. They will be local for local, or largely regional for regional. They have a factory in Berlin that's focusing on will focus on the European market, and similarly in the US. And so if you look at Tesla in terms of their total sales, that in 2030, the sales, that is exports and imports, will be a smaller portion of their total sales in 2030 than it is today. However, all of these factories, and similarly R&D centers, they will be interconnected by the flow of data, blueprints, designs, ideas, and so on. So Tesla to me is just as one case study about the future of globalization, is connectedness by bits. You just look at the development of vaccines, right? There are more than 100 vaccine development efforts that have been taking place over the last 1 year. And all of them are cross-border efforts. You look at not just vaccines, you look at software, you look at cloud, you look at, and so if you go back and stay stuck in the old idea that, it has to be the movement of oil, or it has to be movement of cars from one country to another, that's globalization, or movement of toys or clothing. No, not at all, not at all. That's past, that's going to be history. But globalization is not history. Globalization is robust. And there's a McKinsey analysis, which actually, this is a few years back. It's interesting that it was a few years back, which noted that over the last 20 years, already, this was 2013. So from 1993 to 2013, thereabouts, I think the time period they looked at, actually cross-border data flow contributed almost as much to global GDP as the cross-border flows of physical goods. Since 2013 till today, physical goods trade has become far less important, and digital data flows have become far more important. So it's a reasonable bet. I would be willing to bet my money that over the last 10 years, say 2011 to 2020, data flows contributed more to global GDP than physical goods trade. So therefore, do I shed tears at the demise of physical goods trade? No, I think that's fantastic, because data flows will not only robust, they will keep growing multifold over the coming decades. Another way that I look at it is, the old saying about you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, you teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Give a man a fish is almost like trade in physical goods. Who cares about that now? But it's the movement of know-how across the world. That is like teaching a man how to fish, or collaboratively figuring out how to fish. That is far more important for productivity within countries than trade in physical goods.
So you're talking about IB ecosystems, and obviously you're going to be touching on inequalities, right? Rising inequalities and widening gaps between societies. Where do you see the IB research in the next 5 to 10 years? What's the next big question?
Yeah, I think in the next, in 5 to 10 years, it'll probably be Certainly the importance of context, the importance of governments, and then of course, I mean, IB researchers have been very conscious of non-market actors, including governments, uh, but that is become a far more important actor, if you will, everywhere. It's not just in countries like China or other emerging markets, but you look at US, you look at Europe, and so on. So the importance of context and the importance of government certainly would be, and data flows, digital globalization.
Anil, can you talk about creativity in research? For instance, what does your mind think of when it wanders freely in a state of idle curiosity? How do you come up with these interesting, creative ideas?
Yeah. So I think, to me, the starting point of creativity and research has to do with, let's say, a deep dive into the phenomenon one wants to study. Okay. And, so when I was a student, doctoral student at HBS, so in one of the courses, there was a reading, and I still remember it because I thought it was profound. And the reading was titled something like Maps and Territories. Uh, and the point of the reading was, the article was, that our theories are analogous to maps, and the territories is the real world. And obviously, a good map represents the reality accurately, just like a good theory tries to represent the reality accurately, whatever it is that one is studying theoretically. However, one should never mistake the map for the reality. And so, but then let's say the map is developed from a satellite or from some high level, and then as you go closer to the reality, you see more complexity. And let's say as you go closer to the reality and you have a more defined map, it captures more of the variables, right? And ultimately, and so all the mountains and the heights of buildings, and then you go even lower and the street view, and you go even lower, kind of what people are wearing, and et cetera, et cetera. And so similarly, that what is research? Research is going from, let's say, a good theory, but a good theory at 36,000 foot level, to a good theory at 26,000 foot level, and then 16,000 and 6,000. And so what we say, these are the omitted variables, right? It doesn't mean that the previous theory was necessarily wrong. It could be wrong, but that they were omitted variables. So it could explain only this little, but what we want to explain is more. And so what happens is creativity really is asking novel questions. And how does one come up with the novel questions? And one comes up with novel questions by saying, okay, so what does the literature tell us so far? And then, because even you get, let's say, an R square of 0.38 or 0.4, okay, and highly significant. You say, okay, that's great. But on the other hand, explaining 38% means you haven't explained 62%. So what happens is that, to me, it has always been critical. Before I, let's say, delve into either large data or into surveys, to understand the phenomenon clinically. So like in 1990, when I shifted from looking at the diversified firm to looking at the multinational enterprise, before I started actually doing any research, I talked to about 25, 30 managers, people who work for multinational enterprises. And I traveled to a few countries. And for example, at that time, I used to go to Bocconi in Italy, in Milan, to teach a 2-week summer course on strategy implementation at the business school. And that was in the late 80s. And I would take that opportunity to go, let's say, talk to the president of 3M in Italy, or the president of Procter & Gamble in Italy, and so on, and to understand the multinational enterprise. And at that time, I hadn't started doing any research. or even I had not collected any data. I had not even figured out what it is that, what are the interesting questions. And so it's when I begin to understand in my bones the territory, and then I say, okay, then I go look at the literature, and then I say, okay, what does the literature say? And this is the let's say the real world of companies. And is it something wrong? Or is there something missing? Questions that people are not asking. And it's that kind of a, let's say, a dichotomy, or between the maps and the territories, the theory and the reality, that leads to saying, what are the novel questions? And obviously, if you're going to do empirical work, you need to be aware of the latest methodological developments. But it's unlikely that people in strategy or in business schools would make econometric contributions. Those are done by labor economists and so on, who are trained for it and who have vastly larger chunks of data. So we are going to be consumers of econometrics, the latest developments in econometrics, but we can be producers of creative questions, novel questions. And then you combine novel questions with the leading edge data analytic approaches, and you're going to come up with novel insights. So that's sort of how I see the role of creativity in IB research, or broadly in business school research.
Over time, how do you see the evolution of IB scholarship change? How was it in the past? How is it now? How is it going to be in the future? What is the future?
Yeah. So I mean, so I would say I was, I think, a newcomer to IB research, in the sense that I was not trained in IB. I was trained in strategy the first 10 years after my doctorate. My research had nothing to do with the multinational enterprise and so on. But the first paper that I did, it was submitted to the Academy of Management. It was on something like, I forget the exact title, but it was about theories of control for the multinational enterprise. Okay. And eventually it was published in AMR. And then there was a parallel paper that later came out in SMJ. So my co-author Vijay and I, we sent the paper to the strategy, the BPS division of the Academy, and it was not about strategy. It was about the multinational enterprise. Okay, but we sent it to strategy, and it got picked as the best paper, of the BPS division. So we got that award. And I remember when we were presenting that paper, somebody coming and saying, yeah, but why did you send it to the strategy division? You should have sent it to the IM division. Okay. And my own proclivity is that, and here I may, let's say, differ perhaps from the perspective of some of my IB colleagues, and other fellows, some of the other fellows, perhaps, I'm guessing, in the sense that I see kind of the root disciplines of our research, whether it's in IB or in strategy or in finance, as really economics and sociology, could be psychology, depending on what, but those are the root disciplines. And then what we are doing is building on those root disciplines, okay, on that foundation, and then going deeper into the phenomenon that we want to study, that people in sociology or economics may not care to study. And so therefore, I see research in hardcore strategy or in hardcore organization theory and hardcore IB as all interconnected. Okay. And so I don't particularly care for thinking of IB as a separate field. Okay. And I see the best papers in, say, studying the global enterprise. It's perfectly fine if they are sent to, say, JEBS, but it's perfectly fine if they are sent to AMJ or SMJ or Org Science or, ASQ. And so, I think, and the way I see the tide moving, and the same thing about entrepreneurship. Attempts to set up independent entrepreneurship departments did not succeed. And I think independent international business departments, certainly that number is not growing. If anything, the number is declining. And so I think it's better for people to be, say, in strategy and only do research on the multinational enterprise or on globalization. Totally fine, but rather than separate. So that's sort of, I think, is one. I already see the trend, but I suspect that trend will continue, I think.
Anil, what was the best advice you received when you were going through the PhD program about scholarship, research, your career?
Yeah. So, I mean, the best advice I got was, once again, I think, and again, because it has to go back to the peculiarities of the institution that I did my doctorate at, which is HBS. And HBS is obviously deep into the case method and deep into understanding the companies or the phenomenon clinically, at a gut level. And even though almost 100% of my papers have been large data, econometrics, or conceptual papers like for AMR, but at the so, but that is the fact that I did my doctorate at HBS and the HBS belief is core to me, and that has been a very, very important part of how I have come at research, and at least I would like to believe also the success of my papers. Because when I sent a paper, let's say to an AMJ or an SMJ, that because I knew the phenomenon in my bones, that and obviously the data has to be collected well, and it has to be analyzed well and all of that. I knew that what we were saying was, let's say, a correct representation of the reality. Okay, that's a very strong word, because no representation of the reality is going to be correct. It's always going to be imperfect or incorrect in at least some way. But and in fact, just talking about venture capital, that that in 2017, co-authors and we published a paper, or AMJ published a paper. It was on venture capital syndication, and it had nothing to do with with IB or multinational enterprise. And so AMJ, and it was based on very large database, the entire 100% of the data on venture capital syndication in the US from Venture Expert. But again, my co-authors and we had interviewed 25 or 30 VCs. And but the paper, because it's for AMJ, it's, kind of hypotheses and theory and literature and data and method and all of that, right? But we had a few quotes here and there. It was fantastic that the reviewers, they came back, basically, they're generally good reviews. But what they said was, you guys know so much about this phenomenon as comes out in these two quotations. You need a lot more of those. Imagine, this is an AMJ paper, okay? And it's a large data set, but the reviewers are saying,
sure,
okay? And so that's, and so we put in like 25 quotation marks here and there to buttress the theories and add to them and so on. And And then the reviewers loved it even more, which is great.
I mean, all these are great accomplishments, great things that have worked. But what do you see as the major shortcomings of junior faculty or PhD students? What are the major pitfalls that people should avoid, not to
Yeah.
for their career?
Yeah. So, I mean, so I, yeah, in fact, yeah, because that was one of the questions you had sent to me. So I wanted to be particularly, let's say, thoughtful about what I say there. And so the three I would identify would be, and again, I mean, this is my own bias, given my background and so on, is so three things. Number one, I would say not to think of IB as a separate field from organization theory or strategy. To think of JIBS as one of the top journals for IB research, but not the only top journal. Okay. And so, I mean, it's, yeah, so it's like Sri Zahir, right? So Sri Zahir is obviously a highly respected scholar in the field of IB, but she has published in JET, but she also published in SMJ and other outlets. So that would be number one, is to not to box yourself solely into IB, because then you, let's say, don't benefit from the interconnects. And, like for me, managing the multinational enterprise has so much in common with managing the diversified firm, which has so much in common with how VCs manage portfolio companies. Okay, so we need to benefit from these kind of parallels. That's number one. Number two would be to not go abstract too soon. So, I mean, some of the papers that I get asked to review, so I've seen that the authors, they start with some research questions, and then they go into, this is what the theory has said, and this is now, kind of, when I look at this theory for these questions, these arguments, and I come up with these propositions. Mm-hmm. And, when I read that, I say, you have no clue about the reality. Okay. And you're just too abstract. And what you're saying is just patently wrong. You think it's right because it's supported by theory. But hey, I mean, I have written articles for AMJ and others, and I have had theory, but, and just like the 2017 article in AMJ on venture capital syndication, that, I mean, there are sophisticated ways to build theory that are deeply connected to the reality and superficial ways. And if one goes abstract too soon before understanding the ground level reality, there is a risk of being superficial. And if one is superficial, generally what I have found, the hypotheses they don't get proven. You say, oh, I believe in it, but the data doesn't support it. And the reason the data doesn't support it is because the hypothesis was at 36,000 foot level. And the data is at the ground level. So that would be one. Don't go abstract too soon. And third would be particularly important today, less important when I was a young assistant professor, is to build deep expertise, knowledge base, understanding of at least one root discipline, that guides, informs one's research, whether that's economics or sociology or psychology. But I think it's, because, I mean, in some sense, because, naturally, given the root disciplines, they are looking at broader phenomenon, so sociology. They're not just looking at organizations and industries or, globalization. They're looking at the broad phenomenon, and that when they're looking at the broad phenomenon, they may have, let's say, insights, perspectives, theories, propositions that can be brought to bear on, just as an example, right? the paper on venture capital syndication. Now, in social psychology, there's plenty of literature. How do friendships form? How do friendships groups get created? How do gangs, say, for example, let's say violent criminal gangs, how do they get formed? Which is all about syndication, right? So sociologists have been looking at the formation of friendship groups or formation of criminal groups and so on. Now, not all of that is directly relevant to, say, the formation of venture capital syndicates, but there are connectedness, there are analogies. One can build on that. And so I think to go deep into at least one of the root disciplines of social sciences.
Perfect. Well, for the sake of time, you're out of it, unfortunately. What is one question that I should have asked you but didn't?
No, I think you covered pretty good ground.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate your thoughts, your guidance on all these big issues. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I'm sure the audience will agree with me.
My deep pleasure, Ilgaz. Thank you. Bye-bye.